In the past lectures and readings, we have looked at how various parts of the brain work to carry out different types of behaviors, such as language, reading, and responding to stress. Now we will move from looking at specific anatomical regions of the brain to considering the brain as a whole. We will discuss the concept of cognition, which might be thought of as how we think and what we know. Let's start by defining what we mean by the concept of cognition. We'll turn first to the definition provided by the American Psychological Association. The APA defines cognition as the processes of knowing, including attending, remembering, and reasoning. In a similar manner, the Oxford English Dictionary defines cognition as the actions of knowing, with a particular reference to knowledge as consciousness. Thus, our cognition is the way we know things. It involves multiple aspects, such as paying attention to something, remembering certain things, and using our reasoning ability to interpret what we perceive and what we remember. Earlier, we defined behavior as the actions by which an organism adjusts to its environment. Based on this definition, we can place cognition as a key central component of human behavior. As this slide illustrates, behavior starts with our perception of various stimuli generated by the world outside us, our external environment. After perceiving these stimuli through our various sensory capacities, for example, vision, hearing, or smell, our mind will then interpret these sensations and give them meaning. Once we know what these stimuli represent, we can then take action in response to them. Thus, cognition is a key central component of the behavioral process. As a first step in understanding what cognition is and how it works, I will ask us to think about a newborn infant and how the infant comes to recognize visual images. As this diagram shows, the eyes, which are located in the front of the brain, connect to the visual cortex located in the back of the brain through the fibers of the optic nerve. This axonal connection is quite complex in that the fibers from each eye split and crisscross with those from the other eye. In this diagram, the fibers from the left side of each eye are shown as green, while the fibers from the right side of each eye are shown as red. The fibers from the left side of the left eye connect to the left visual cortex, while those from the right side of the left eye split off in what is referred to as the optic chiasma and go to the right visual cortex. The same happens to the fibers of the right eye, with half going to each visual cortex. Thus, the images received in each visual cortex are made up of the combined neural impulses from the corresponding side of each eye. As a first step in understanding what cognition is and how it works, I'll ask us to think about the visual impulses the cortices of a newborn infant receive as soon as she or he first opens her or his eyes. This issue was addressed in a paper published in 2014 by Professor Carla Schatz and her colleagues of Stanford University. In announcing the study, the Stanford News Service summarized the implications of the study in the following terms. A newborn baby, for all its cooing cuddliness, is a data acquisition machine absorbing information to finish honing the job of brain wiring that started before birth. This is true nowhere more so than the eyes, which start life peering at a blurry world and within months can make out a crisp three-dimensional image of a mobile dangling overhead. Amy Adams, in reporting on the study, goes on to explain that, quote, this process of refining the brain's wiring involves cutting off some of the excess nerve connections we have at birth while strengthening connections we use all the time. Some estimates show that as many as half of the brain's visual connections formed during development are clipped back as the final wiring takes shape, unquote. In explaining her work, Professor Schatz indicates that, quote, vision is a challenging problem because you have two eyes and only one view of the world. There's a very beautiful set of wiring steps that makes sure the eyes are pointed at the same place and the two images get aligned." Unquote. The light receptors in the retina of the eye gather images of the external world from many different angles. In order to see the visual images clearly, the visual cortex must identify those specific optic nerve axons that, when firing together, create a clear, well-defined image. Those axons that give images that don't match this main image must then be pruned back through demyelination. Schatz explains that the rule of which connections the brain cuts back to create that single visual image follow a simple mantra, quote, "Fire together, wire together. Out of sync, lose your link," unquote. Dr. Schatz is indicating that early in life of newborn infants, when the left sides of both eyes see the same image, those neurons will fire together and stay linked up to the visual cortices. If by contrast the top of one eye, for example, and the bottom of the other form a connection, these nerves will fire out of sync, and these connections will then weaken and will eventually be pruned back. Over time, the only connections that remain are between the parts of the two eyes that are seeing the same clear image. This process of pruning optic nerve axons in order to maintain a clear visual image is extremely important for children born with a condition called strabismus. In this condition, due to weakness of the muscles that move the eye, a newborn infant's eyes do not look in the same direction. The child is what is sometimes referred to in the vernacular as cross-eyed. You can easily understand that for this child, it will not be possible for the visual cortices to select a set of coordinated optic axons to create a clear image because each eye is looking in a different direction. The only way for the visual cortices to create a single clear image is to ignore the signals coming from one of the eyes. Without treatment, this process will lead over time to pruning of the entire optic nerve fibers from one eye, leaving a clear image generated from the other eye, but leaving the weak eye permanently blinded. This image illustrates the treatment for this condition for a child born with a weak right eye and a strong left eye. Left untreated, the right eye would have become blind. Instead, the parents will be taught to put a patch over the strong eye for about half of each day, which then necessitates that the infant use the images of the weaker eye in order to see. In this manner, the optic nerves of each eye become myelinated. When the child is old enough to have the weak eye muscles surgically corrected, she or he can then begin to use both eyes to form a single clear image. Let's now shift our discussion from the newborn infant developing clear visual images to the auditory impulses a newborn infant senses as part of hearing, and how those impulses contribute to the development of language. In 2013, Moon and colleagues published a report of their study in which they played recordings of human vowel sounds to a newborn infant who was less than 2 days old. Some of the vowel sounds were vowel sounds taken from the mother's native language, and some were vowel sounds from a language that was foreign to the mother. When they heard these sounds, the infants involved in the study were sucking on a pacifier that sensed how often they sucked. They found that infants responded differently to native and non-native sounds, sucking more slowly in response to native sounds, leading the authors to conclude that, quote, birth is not a benchmark that reflects a complete separation between the effects of nature versus those of nurture. Neonates' perception of speech sounds already reflects some degree of learning, unquote. While in the uterine environment, the infants have learned what their mother's language sounds like, at least the vowel sounds. Let us recall that the development of language involves the integration of auditory input with visual input in order to associate sounds with images. This integration takes place first in Wernicke's area, which then associates these images in order to give them meaning through connection to Broca's area in their prefrontal cortex. This connection is created by the arcuate fasciculus, a thick band of axons between Wernicke's area and Broca's area. The development of word recognition, the first step towards the acquisition of language, will depend on how well the arcuate fasciculus is able to conduct these impulses. In a study published in 2013, Anne Fernald and colleagues were able to study the development of word recognition in 18-month-old infants. They played the sound of a spoken word for the infant to hear and immediately displayed two pictures for the infant to look at. One, an image of the object associated with the word, and another of an object that was unrelated to the word. In order to understand the meaning of the word doggy, an infant must recognize this unique sound when it is spoken and associated with the visual image of the four-legged animal it represents. Using a camera focused on the infant's eyes, the researchers were able to watch the direction of the infant's gaze after hearing the word to see if it was directed to the picture of the object associated with it. They used words such as baby, doggy, birdie, and ball. They found that these infants were able quickly to recognize many of the words. They noted, however, that children from lower SES families recognized fewer words on average than children from higher SES families. They then retested the infants when they were 24 months old to see both how much their vocabulary had developed in the intervening 6 months and to reassess the observed differences in vocabulary among lower and higher SES infants. The results are shown in this graph. Between the ages of 18 and 24 months, both groups of infants learned more words, with the higher SES infants showing a greater increase, and the gap between the two groups widening. Infants in lower SES families are learning fewer words, and would therefore also be expected to be using fewer of the axons involved in word recognition. This brings up the possibility that, with more axons in the arcuate fasciculus going unused, the unused axons involved in language may at some point be pruned back. This possibility will take on added importance when we consider in a future lecture the neural systems and connections involved in learning to read.